Your relationship with your lead pastor can make or break your ministry. If it's strong, well, you can thrive. If it's strained, it can make every day a battle. So how do you do it? How do you make it work? How do you avoid the frustration, the miscommunication, and the feeling that you're constantly just butting heads? Well, stick around because I'm about to give you some practical strategies that could change everything. Hey everybody, welcome to the Brent Parsley Next Gen Leader Podcast. My name is Brent, and I hope that today's episode helps you win in Next Gen ministry. I want to help you with the how of Next Gen ministry so that you can do what matters most. And today we're going to dive into that all-important lead pastor, Next Gen pastor relationship. This relationship is one of the most important ones in the church, I think, and it's one of the things that can lead you to greater longevity. It's also one of the relationships that gets real tricky and can cause a lot of problems and actually cause people to depart too soon. So we're going to talk about a few strategies to try to help all that. And if you find this podcast helpful today, would you please subscribe on YouTube, maybe give it a like or jump in the comments section and leave a review on Apple Podcasts or your podcast app of choice. And share it with a student pastor or a kids pastor or a Next Gen leader, anybody in Next Gen ministry that you know. Be a part of getting some hopefully helpful coaching and training out to more great leaders just like you. So if you talk to Next Gen leaders about the hard stuff that they often run into, one of the topics that's going to come up often is their relationship with their lead pastor. I'm sure you've got your own stories. Some of those are really positive. Some of those are really negative. Maybe even you've got some crazy disasters in your history. So I want to throw at you several strategies that I've employed over the years that I think can help your relationship with your lead pastor get healthier and maybe even grow and help you thrive. And it all sits under one big heading, and that is add value to your lead pastor. Sometimes we forget that this is actually why we got hired on in the first place, especially when we're younger. We've got all these dreams and visions about our own ministry and all the things that we're going to do, and we even talk about it like that. I'm so excited to get started with my ministry. But the truth is, this isn't your ministry. This is God's work. This is what He's doing. It's His church, and He's chosen your lead pastor whose authority you sit under. So you are His arm to reach out to kids and students and families in that church and in your region. So during one season of student ministry, we had a lot of skaters that were starting to show up on our Wednesday nights. It was awesome, honestly. I mean, it was kind of crazy because they were a little rebellious, kind of anarchists, honestly. But we were having a great time figuring out how to minister to them. So we decided that we were going to build some skate park elements that they could use before and after the meetings, right? So we just did some rails and some ramps, little stuff that we could set out and then put away easily when it was time for the meeting. Well, one night, one of our leaders, he was starting to put things away because we were starting to usher students into the room to have the meeting. It was about to start. But one kid and a couple of his buddies, they decided, well, they didn't want to go in. So this leader and this kid, they kind of get into it. And they start to yell at each other. It starts to escalate a little bit. And the leader ends up grabbing this kid by the arm and ripping his jacket. Of course, this is a no-no. This is a no-go in student or kids ministry. You can't do this. And this kid got really mad, and they had some more words. Thankfully, it didn't escalate much further at that point. So I hear this story when the night's over, and I immediately get to work. And I did three things. I reached out right away, and I talked to that leader. And we had a pretty frank discussion about what had happened, and I got his side of the story. And he admitted he knows that we never put hands on a student, and he understood. And actually, over the course of the conversation, we decided that it was time for him to step away. I also, though, the second thing, I reached out first thing the next morning to his family, talked to his mom, and we had a long conversation about it. Talked about what happened. I got her side of the story. I told her that this was unacceptable behavior. We had a discussion about that particular leader and what had happened. She understood that her kid wasn't in the right either, but she was really grateful for the conversation. The student was okay, and honestly, that was pretty much the end of it. Then immediately after that, the third call I made was to my pastor. I left him a message because he didn't pick up, and I told him briefly what had happened. I told him all the decisions that I made. I told him I talked to the parents, and I told him what the end result was. And then I told him, it sounds like it's all good, and you don't need to call me unless you want to talk about it. Well, it turns out that student's dad, he was kind of a big wig in a really well-known international organization. How's that for being vague? But he was a bigwig, and that doesn't mean that this student or that family is more important than any other family or kid. It just means that the consequences of this incident or my inaction, it could have been pretty severe and caused, honestly, a pretty big headache for my pastor. And so if he would have received a call from that guy and nothing had happened on my end, well, that would have been a bad day pretty much for everybody. So I added value to him and to our church on that particular day. I made his life easier. I didn't add something else to his plate that he now has to deal with. He was glad to have me on his team instead of me being a burden to him. So here's a few things that I think can add value to your lead pastor and maybe strengthen your relationship. By the way, I'm assuming that you've got a really reasonable and well-intentioned leader. And if that's not your current story, well, that may be another podcast. But if you're looking to grow this relationship and add value, then start by aligning with his vision. I've already mentioned this. I've talked about this in an earlier episode, but just make sure that you're aligned with his vision rather than trying to get him to align with yours. It's awesome that you've got a strategy and so many ideas and thoughts and visions for your kids ministry, your student ministry, and for the overall church. It's awesome. It's just that he probably does too. And under Christ, he's the leader. So start by aligning yourself with his direction and where he's going and adapting what he's doing to your kids or student ministry. One example that we have had is that my pastor talked a lot about fasting, so we taught on fasting often. We held fasting retreats. It was a major part of what we were doing. Every Sunday, I was listening to his messages, and I was figuring out how can I take this and bring this and these ideas into what I preach about on a Wednesday night. And if you'll do this, honestly, you're going to start to eliminate a lot of the friction that starts to rise up in your relationship because you're just already deciding, I'm going to submit under his authority instead of constantly pushing against what he's trying to do, trying to get him to do what I want to do or what I want him to do. And hopefully over time, with faithfulness and trust, you're going to be able to contribute some more to that vision. But wait for the invitation to do that. Wait for it until he invites you into it. And in the meantime, align yourself with the church's vision. Next up is to remember who's in charge. Now, I realize that may sound a little bit silly, but it's really helpful mindset. My pastor was highly, highly relational. So our culture was not top-down and authoritarian. We had a very wide and very flat org chart. And there can be problems with that too. But if you're not careful, what happens is you can lean a little too far into the buddy-buddy mentality. So yeah, man, me and the pastor, we're buds, we hang out, we talk. It's awesome. I love it. He's a great guy. And I love that. That's actually really good. But then when you make a mistake and he's got to bring you correction, well, that might be pretty jarring and honestly a little upsetting. And so when he gives you a direct order, or you get mad because, well, how dare he? I thought we were friends. But if I can remember that he is the guy that's in charge, he doesn't have to. That means that he can switch hats as he wants to and when he needs to. So if he wants to wear the friend hat, that's great. I remember, though, that he's in charge, but we can hang out and be friends. But if he has to in that same conversation, he's got to switch to the boss hat, well, that's no problem either. I remember he's the boss, and he has the freedom then to lead like he needs to. So I bear the responsibility, and it helps me keep my heart clean and our relationship healthy. My current pastor also happens to be my brother. So you can imagine this is incredibly helpful in that scenario too, because it would be really easy for me to slip into brother mode and tell him what I really think during a meeting. And that may or may not have happened a time or two or maybe more over the years. But if I remember he's in charge, he's the boss, it keeps me in the right place and under his authority. It keeps me from voicing my thoughts in an inappropriate manner or at an inappropriate time, and the staff and the church benefit from that, as does our relationship. Now, I'm sure that there are probably some possible abuses that could arise out of this, but for the most part, I'm just telling you, it's a beneficial heart posture. Remember, he's in charge, so he doesn't have to. Next up is to keep him informed. Some leaders, they're micromanagers. Other leaders end up being kind of totally hands-off. Regardless of your pastor's leadership style, it's really good for him to be in the know of what's going on with you and in the ministry. Hopefully you've got some kind of standing meeting, with him regularly or with your direct oversight to kind of talk about kids or students. But we know that's not always the case. And if it's not, well, maybe just think about something like shooting him an email with brief and relevant things that you want him to know. Tell him things like what the attendance was and how many leaders you had, or what upcoming events that you've got going on, or what you're thinking about for the future of the ministry. And most importantly, tell him a story, one story of something great that happened that morning or that night. One win that you guys can celebrate together, and maybe he might even want to tell the church about it. And don't ask for anything. Like, don't use this as the doorway to kind of slip in and try to get something you want. Hey, here's a bunch of great things that are happening. By the way, could you? Don't do that. Just let it be a way to keep him in the loop and keep him up to speed, and don't ask for anything in return. It'll contribute to how much he believes in what's happening around there, and it'll contribute to your relationship. You got to figure out the avenue that he likes and maybe the frequency. Maybe it's once a week. Maybe it's right after the service. Maybe it's every other week. Maybe it's just once a month. I don't know. Try it out and ask him. Next up is always bring solutions. Always bring a solution. Nobody wants to hear about problems all the time. And he's already dealing with more problems than you're aware of. So every time you run into a problem and you need help, also bring with that problem a solution. Take a little time before you call him and brainstorm. What are 2 or 3 possible solutions to this problem that I'm facing? And then when you meet, tell him those options and then ask for his input. Which one do you think we should try? Now, he might have another idea that you didn't think of that he's more comfortable with, or he might say, I don't know, you know what, let's try number 3, and why don't you report back to me and let me know how that goes. You just added crazy value to him by bringing some answers instead of being needy and asking him to solve this difficult problem. Even if your solutions aren't great, honestly, it can spur his thinking and help him arrive at another solution more quickly. So I'm just telling you what you already know. Everybody wants this kind of leader on their team. Next up is support the overall church. And I think this can be quick, but it's so easy to become a silo in Next Gen ministry, right? Oftentimes, people don't think a lot about the kids ministry. It's just the reality. So you just do your thing on Sunday morning and try to make it good. And they don't know all the things that you're doing. You're scheduling leaders and you're prepping curriculum and you're getting snacks ready and all the supplies and you're trying to fill gaps when a leader doesn't show up. All the difficulty that comes along with it. And student ministry often becomes its own thing happening on another night of the week other than Sunday, and so it's out of everybody's mind. And it has all the components of a church service. You got to do worship. You have a worship team. You've got to teach. You have small groups and small group leaders. You've got greeters. You've got follow-up, all those things. And it's easy to get overwhelmed with all the stuff that you have to do. And sometimes you just get mad because you feel like the rest of the church and even your pastor, they don't really care. And those are problems, it's true. But you can stew in all of that, or you can choose to lift up your eyes and invest in all the other things that your church is doing. You can support all the church events with everything that you've got. Like show up at the church-wide prayer meetings and even bring some students along, or provide some prayer resources that kids or families could use during that season. Maybe ask how you could help support the missions trips that are coming up, or outreach opportunities from your seat on the bus. What can I do? Don't sit and wait for them to care about what you're doing. Show them that you're a true team player. And it might not result in you getting what you want, but it will result in stronger relationships because you're making the effort. And honestly, it's just the right thing to do. I think it'll contribute to your overall relationship. And finally, if you want to grow the senior pastor relationship that you have, allow him to lead the relationship. I've already said that the first pastor that I served under was really relational, but he was also really, really driven. He did a lot. And he was a really influential guy even when I started at that church, and he grew in that influence over the years. So a lot of people were looking to him for encouragement and direction and strategy and vision and how to do church and all the things. And he loved to hang out. Like, he enjoyed life. He was fun. And so you just never knew when you were headed into his office what mood he was going to be in. And so what I learned over time was, well, I probably should bring 2 agendas when I come in to ask for something. And the first agenda was the actual thing that I needed help with. I needed to talk about a specific problem or get some help and guidance as I tried to offer some solutions. But the second agenda was just to hang out and laugh, because if that's the mood he was in, well, honestly, that's just what was going to happen. The simple point is, just allow him the freedom to lead the relationship. He is the boss after all, and you're not. And there's a whole host of reasons why that relationship might not be like you think that it should. Maybe he's more introverted. Maybe he might not keep a calendar or a schedule in the same way that maybe you do. Depending on his age, he may have more family responsibilities with little kids or with teenagers at home, and he's dealing with a lot there. You don't know what he's dealing with in the church or with the board. You didn't know that he spent every night this week up late trying to work on bylaws because the board has to vote on those. He's not telling you about all the emails that he's receiving and all the things and the feedback and the criticism that he's dealing with. I'm just saying there's lots of reasons why that relationship isn't where necessarily you think that it should be. And so give him the benefit of the doubt. Give him a little bit of grace and give it time. Try out a few of these strategies, some of these things that have really helped me over the years, and have some patience. I believe and I'm praying that over time, your relationship will strengthen and grow, and incredible ministry fruit is going to come out of it. Hey, if this was helpful in any way, I'd love it if you'd subscribe, maybe drop a comment in YouTube, or if you think it deserves it, give it a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. That really does help. And then think about somebody in Next Gen Ministry that you could send the link to and encourage them in their ministry today. And as always, if you want to talk, you can email me at brent@brentparsley.me, or you can DM me at brentparsley on Instagram. So until next time, I really hope that today's episode helps you win in Next Gen Ministry.